What a blessing to be here with you this morning and share, I hope, some little different sermon this morning. I had the privilege several years ago of going to Oklahoma Christian and hearing a lectureship by a gentleman who was a member of Hitler's Youth. And I don't know if you know what that is or not, but Hitler had a pretty firm belief that if he could swing the young people of Germany into believing the state was more or less their God, is the best way I know to put it, that he could hold sway over them and get them to do what he wanted to do. Very, very realistic idea, actually. And so Hitler had this thing that was called Hitler's Youth, and he would basically take them and he would take them on trips, resorts, what we would call camps, do things with them, provide for them, and kind of incorporate them into this system. And this young man was a member of that. And at the age of about 15 or 16, he was actually had to go and fight during World War II, right at the end of World War II. And he shared some really interesting things in that lectureship. It's something that I think about quite often and really influenced a lot of the ways that I not only think about that war, but also think about a lot of things to do with war and government and our role as Christians in that scheme of things. And I think that one thing that he said, you need to read this book. And so I did, and I would recommend you to read this book. It's When a Nation Forgets God. 7 lessons we learn from Nazi Germany. We must learn from Nazi Germany. And it really speaks about a lot of things that got me thinking about a lot of things. It got me reading a lot more things about not only about what Erwin Lutzer had to say in this book, but also about men who stood up for the church in that time, and got me reading men like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and guys like that have very influenced a lot of the ways that I kind of look at things sometimes. But he basically brings up 7 points, and in those points, we're going to talk a little bit about one of these this morning. He said, when God is separated from government, judgment follows. You know, we live in a supposedly Christian nation, but, where are we at in the scheme of things? It's always the economy. You know, isn't that true? I've seen so many people over the years. Their political views are not about morality or about God, but they're simply about the economy. Chicken in every pot, a car in every garage. And I think that's true in politics. That which is legal might also be evil, right? There's a lot of things that are legal in the world that are evil in the world. And sometimes we're under that system. Propaganda can change a nation. You believe me? Absolutely. Absolutely. Parents, not the state, are responsible for a child's training. And we need to think about that. I think that's an important thing. Ordinary heroes can make a difference. In the last chapter he reads in this book, we must exalt the cross in the gathering darkness. How did Hitler do what he did? You ever thought about that a little bit? How did Hitler accomplish what he accomplished? He went into a nation that was economically devastated, that had unbelievable inflation. The joke is that you ordered a cup of coffee, and if you got a refill, it was twice what it was when you ordered it the first time. Inflation was literally unbelievable. Took a shopping cart full of money to buy a loaf of bread. Money had absolutely no value. People were burning it. People thought that the world was out against them. A lot of that from the end of World War I had caused that issue, and the German people thought the world was against them. Hitler was popular. Hitler was their salvation in a lot of ways. He wasn't the monster to them that you and I see that he became. In the early stages, he was their hero. They looked up to him. He revived the economy. The guy that I talked to that had the lectureship said for the first time in his life, they were able to eat a good meal, to take a family vacation. They'd never been able to do that till Hitler came into power. He swayed the nation. But also, how did he do the horrendously bad things that he did? Right? How did he do that? How do you kill that many people and get away with it? How do you do that? You know, uniquely, we've made the Holocaust a very uniquely Jewish event. And there were a substantial amount of Jews killed in the Holocaust. But make no mistake about it, the Holocaust was not uniquely Jewish. The Holocaust was about a lot of different people. How did he do that? How did he make that happen? The guy in the lectureship, he said that as he was fleeing the front lines, the front line of the war, as Berlin was falling, and he was fleeing in the back of a pickup truck that his commanding officer had found and commandeered, and they were under a tarp in the back of this pickup truck, and they went by one of the concentration camps, and he saw an emancipated person that basically had no flesh or bones on him, and he saw a soldier take that person and bludgeon him to death with the butt of a rifle. And in his mind, he thought, how can humanity get to that point of violence, to that point of hate? How do we do that to another person, another human being? How can we do it? And the truth is that Hitler dehumanized them people. He made them less than human. And that's what we do with our terminology and our words, and we do that in this country today. And the truth is, brethren, you and I as Christians have to understand the sanctity of human life. We have to understand that life is important and life has value and life is created by God. And it's not our place to take that. And the cruelty of the world stands out before us every day, and we see the atrocities that go on, and we wonder, how can people do that? How can they possibly do something like that? And the reason is because we've dehumanized things. It's no longer a person that they're doing it to. We've taken that away from them. He empowered those who supported him through intimidation and laws. Isn't that how he did it? Absolutely. He passed laws to limit the power that people had and to limit the power of the church and to limit the power of people around him. He passed laws to get done what he needed to get done, laws that restricted people, laws that made things that were evil legal. Didn't he? He gained the trust of the German people by economic and reform, and they believed in him, and he used that to his advantage. Hitler called all the big guys of the church together, Dietrich Bonhoeffer being one of those guys. He called them into a room after he'd come into power through these means, and he basically called all these leaders of the churches of Germany into this room, and he basically told them, he says, I'm not against you. You can do whatever you want to do in your church. As long as you keep it in your church, do what you want. But don't contradict the government. The church can be the church as long as it doesn't contradict the government. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, absolutely not. And right before the fall of Berlin, a week before the fall of Berlin, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was burned to death by the Nazis. But he stood for what he believed. And if I give you another good book to read about this, if you want to, it's called The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Hitler says, you confine yourself to the church, and I'll take care of the German people. You confine yourself to the church, and I'll take care of the German people. One thing that this guy told me that really influenced me is something I'd never thought about in my life. And I'm born here, and I've been raised here, and I've been an American my entire life, and I've been through all these history classes when I was a child and history classes in college. And he brought up something to me that I never thought about before until he said it, because he was converted by a Church of Christ missionary that went to Germany after World War II, converted him to Christianity, and he applied and became a United States citizen. And we asked him, why did you do that? Why did you leave Germany? Why did you leave your home? Why did you leave your family? Why did you become a citizen of the United States? And he said, I became a citizen of the United States because the United States of America is the only country in the world. I never thought about this. I guess I should have. Maybe we take it for granted. He said it's the only country in the world that says we have rights from God, not from the state, not from the government. We have rights from God. Taylor's in here. He can politically fact check me this morning. But the truth is that not all signers of the Declaration of Independence or writers of the bill, not all of them were Christians, but they were all deists. Am I right on that? They were all deists. And they all believed that we had a creator, God. They weren't all Christians. They weren't all Christians like you and I are, but they were all deists. The ones that weren't Christian were deists. They believed that we had a God that created us. And what did they write? They said all men are created equal. And they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. I want you to think about something with me this morning. We live in the only country in the world that says our rights come from God. Not from man, not from a government. Our rights come from God. We forgot that along the way, haven't we? We've forgotten that along the way. Hitler had a good way of making the state people's God, the government people's God. But you and I are citizens of a much bigger kingdom than the United States. You and I are citizens of the kingdom of heaven. We have rights, and because of that, we all have rights. Torture and death within concentration camps. 11 million people were killed during the Holocaust. 1.1 million children. 6 million of those were Jewish. But that wasn't all, was it? The Roma, the mentally ill, the infirm, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals. There were a lot of Jews, but it wasn't a Jewish Holocaust. It was a Holocaust against everybody who didn't hold or meet the standards that Hitler thought they needed to. Hitler decided, the government decided, the state decided who was worthy to live and who had to die. That's sobering to me. Isn't it to you? How do we do that? How do you dehumanize a person, a thing? Well, we don't call them elderly or disabled or mentally handicapped. We call them a liability, don't we? They're a drain on society. Use of resources. How do you justify abortion? You don't call them babies, do you? You call them fetuses. Because it sounds a lot better to say we killed a fetus than to say we killed a baby, doesn't it? When we dehumanize things, we take away their sanctity in the eyes of God and in our minds. I want to tell you something. Taking away COVID, the year that COVID killed so many, the leading cause of death in this country is not strokes, it's not heart disease, it's not cancer. The leading cause of death in the United States of America is abortion. Hands down. Why do we do that? Why do we do that? The problem's not abortion, really. It is, but it's not. The problem is a lack of God in our society, a lack of God in our homes, a lack of God in our government, a lack of God where God should matter, where God should be. Almost all abortions are by women who aren't married. Where do we have a breakdown in our families, in our homes, and the idea that marriage is important, that family is important, that why do we have abortions in a country where there's no need to get pregnant? Why do we do that? Why don't we fix the problem and instead of dealing with our mess? Because we've taken God out of Main Street of America and we've put him in the side street of America. Our churches are on the side street of our towns instead of the main street of our towns. And we no longer carry the influence that we need to carry. And us as Christians should be ashamed of ourselves. Ashamed of ourselves for not standing up for things that we know are right. For things we know are right. We've let this world change us. We've let it influence us. We've let it dehumanize our thinking. Things don't shock us anymore. And they should. This should astound us. We should be going, good grief. I was the Lake Tenkiller years ago. We was out and rented this boat. We come back and they got them cliffs at Lake Tenkiller. Y'all been down there? They got them cliffs they jump off of down at Lake Tenkiller. This young man had jumped off a cliff and broke his neck, killed himself. And they got him up out of the water. They put him in this boat. He was lying dead at the bottom of this boat. And we got off this boat with all these people. And everybody just walked by and looked, and it didn't even matter. That's where we are as a country. That's where we are as a society. We're to a point that we forgot the value and the sanctity. We saw death so much. We see it on TV, and we see it in movies, and we see it everywhere. And we saw it so much that it doesn't affect us anymore like it used to. Shame on us. How can we let this happen? And when things start to change and the world starts to attack, where's our voice? What are we saying? I don't know if you know this, but there's a day of the year I didn't know existed until about 4 years ago. Because I know about Mother's Day, I know about Father's Day, and then on Facebook I found out, I guess we have National Son, National Daughter's Day now. I don't know what's next, National Cousin Twice Removed Day or something, but there's a day in the United States, it's on January 22nd. It's called National Sanctity of Life Day. And President Ronald Reagan made this a national day in 1984, I believe it was. Might be wrong on that. Today we focus our attention on love and protection each person, born or unborn, deserves, regardless of disability, gender, appearance, or ethnicity. Much of the greatest suffering in our nation's history, and indeed our planet's history, has been the result of disgracefully misguided attempts to dehumanize whole classes of people based on immutable characteristics. We cannot let this shameful history repeat itself in new forms. We must be particularly vigilant to safeguard the most vulnerable lives among us. That is why we observe National Sanctity of Human Life Day, to affirm the truth that all life is sacred, and that every person has an inherent dignity and worth, and that no class of people should ever be discarded as non-human. I think that's powerful language myself. I know it's not Scripture, but I think those are powerful words. It says reverence for every human life, one of the values for which our founding fathers fought, defines the character of our nation. Today it moves us to promise the health of pregnant mothers and their unborn children. It animates our concern for single moms, the elderly, the infirm, the disabled, and orphan and foster children. It compels us to address the opioid epidemic and to bring to those who struggle with mental illness. It gives us the courage to stand up for the weak and the powerless. It dispels the notion that our worth depends on the extent to which we are planned for or wanted. Every life is precious to God. Every life. And if it's precious to God, it should be precious to us. The psalmist says, "For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. What does the psalmist say? He says that God knows us from our conception. He knows us from when we're wrought together in the depths of the earth, that we're skillfully and wonderfully made. Life is precious, it's valuable, and we should hold it dear to us. Whatever life that may be, the life of the unborn, the life of the aged, the life of the mentally ill, the life of the disabled, that life should be precious to us, because it's precious to God. We shouldn't dehumanize people in our minds or by our language or by our thoughts. We should make them sacred. In Luke, he says, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 cents, yet not one of them is forgotten before God. Indeed, the very hairs of your head are numbered. Do not fear, you are more valuable than many sparrows." How important are you to God? You're more valuable than many sparrows. We are more valuable than many sparrows. Peter says, "Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence ignorance of foolish men." Brethren, you and I live in a democracy, don't we? We live in a republic, I guess a democracy. We live in a land where our voice should count, and we have uniquely the ability to make our voice heard. We can submit to the authority of our government. We can submit to what they say. But when it comes to a decision between what our government says is right and what we know is right, what God says is right, you and I have a choice to make. We have an obligation to stand on the side of the Lord when it comes to those things. This is the same Peter who also said in Acts, Peter and the apostle answered, "We must obey God rather than men." We understand that we are peaceable people. We're loving people. We're caring people. We're submissive people to our government. But we also understand, brethren, that you and I have a responsibility as Christians to speak out and to say those things that we know to be true and to hold our truths and to represent our truths to those people around us. You and I as Christians need to understand our responsibility that we have to God to let the world know what we think about life, what we think about people, what we think about morality. We need to stop being the silent minority or the silent majority or whatever we are, and we need to start letting people know exactly how we feel about things, don't we? We need to stand up for what we believe, and people need to know what we believe. I lived in Germany during the Nazi Holocaust. I consider myself a Christian. We heard stories of what was happening to the Jews, but we tried to distance ourselves from it. Because what could anyone do to stop it? A railroad track ran behind our small church, and each Sunday morning we could hear the whistle in the distance and then the wheels coming over the tracks. And we became disturbed when we heard the cries coming from the train when it passed by. We realized it was carrying Jews like cattle in the cars. And week after week, the whistle would blow. We dreaded to hear the sound of those wheels because we knew we'd hear the cries of the Jews en route to a death camp. Their screams tormented us. We knew the time the train was coming. When we heard the whistle blow, we began singing hymns, and by the time the train came past our church, we were singing at the top of our voices. If we heard the screams, we sang more loudly, and soon we heard no more. Years passed, and no one talks about it anymore, but I still hear that train's whistle in my sleep. God, forgive me, forgive us all. Forgive all of us who called ourselves Christians and yet did nothing to intervene. You know, I've talked to the elders before I preached this sermon, because I preach sermons like this and people always go, "Well, what can we do?" Yeah, you preach this, Rex, and it all sounds great, and we're little bitty people inside of a great big machine. And we're just like those people that heard that train go by, and we thought, what can we do? What can we do to change things? You know, Gary and I talked, and we talked about the fact that A lot of times we always talk about our government. We always talk about what we want different, what they do wrong, but how many of us actually take time to contact them, to write them, to express our views, to email them, to tell them what we as Christians think this world should look like, what's important to us, to me and you. I'm not telling you what you should write. I'm not influencing you to what you should say. I don't know. You're your own person. I don't know what's important to you, what you think is big to you, but I know that the world doesn't change when we all stay silent, does it? Bad things happen when good people fail to speak. We all know these things, right? Brethren, the church is at a place in the history of this country that I feel like we're putting ourselves in a box because we're not doing anything to change the things that are going on around us as individuals. So I can't tell you what to write, I can't tell you what to do, and I can't tell you to do it, and I'm not telling you to do it. I'm just simply telling you that we as Christians, if these things are important to us, we need to let those people that represent us know that it's important to us. And so on the back of the table back there is a list, because you might not know, and this is probably going to change in November, I guess, but there's a list on the back of here that has your senators and your congressmen and their addresses and their phone numbers. And if you want to look that up online, you can email them. So if you leave here this morning and you ask me that question, Rex, you preached this sermon, what can I do? You need to pick that up, and you just need to write them and tell them what you think. Not what I think. You need to tell them what you think. You need to let your voice be heard. Because if they don't hear from you, they're going to hear from somebody else who might not have your views. It's not a political sermon, I promise. It's not. It's a religious sermon. It's a God sermon. It's a sermon that says you and I as Christians have a responsibility to the best of our ability to live peaceably in this nation and to try to put forth the cause of Jesus Christ to the world. And the way sometimes we have to do that is by writing and letting people know what our views are. We can't always just go home and say, I just hate what's happening. I just hate to see this going on. And never take the initiative to say anything about it. So if this has affected you, then speak. And if it hasn't, then I don't guess you have to. But as Christians, where do we stand? Where do we stand? I know where I stand. I stand on God's side. To the best of my ability, I stand on God's side. And I hope that you do too. Because this world needs one thing. One thing. It doesn't need another great leader or a great president. It doesn't need another government or another war. It doesn't need another revolution. What this world needs is what this world has always needed, and that's Jesus Christ. And it's our responsibility to promote him on this earth. If there's any way that we can help you, if you need the prayers of this congregation, if we can assist you in any way, won't you let it be known while we stand and sing.